Thanks, everybody. Okay, so having had lots of talk, if you go to page 13 of document B, we'll go back to AB1, and we're just not going to try and amalgamate it with AC2. It's going to be a separate recommendation, AB1, okay? So, AB1 on page 13 in document B, all penalties for any breach of pollution or environmental legislation regulations should be increased to meaningful economic levels reflecting the damage caused, plus enforcement or restoration costs with criminal sanction where necessary. Any amendments to that wording, not trying to make it amalgamate with AC2? Keith?
I would remove or restoration costs. I'd just put in plus enforcement and restoration costs.
Plus enforcement and restoration costs, okay? That's okay? Yeah. Okay, all those in favour of including this on your ballot paper, please raise your hand. Thank you. Okay, that's great. And just for completeness then, with the points well made earlier, IBTB1, we're just going to keep it as a separate recommendation. We're not going to try and amalgamate it with IBT3 in Doc A, because there is a different focus on them. So we voted on it, but it's going to be a separate recommendation. And thanks to Liam for pointing that out. Great. Now, we'll go back to our forestry. And we left Cathal catching up with the typing on FWH5. Quilcha, there we are. So, this is where we are. The Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and the Marine must implement incentives for state, semi-state and commercial bodies to establish more nurseries for the cultivation of indigenous hedgerow species and indigenous broadleaf tree species. All those in favour of amending this wording to not just focus on Quilcha, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much. FWH6. Okay, we have, I can't see your table,
John.
Sorry.
I don't think
John.
it's we should be telling a commercial entity how to allocate its profit. Income is the wrong word anyway, but I don't think we should be telling a commercial entity or what to do with its profits. It's outside our remit, in my opinion.
Okay, but then you can vote against it, John.
Okay.
Are there amendments to wording? Table 9? And sorry, table 11, I didn't see you there. Table 11, please, first.
It's just a minor update after talking to one of the EAG. It was just to change at the beginning to a significant portion of income, so that's not implied that it's all of their income.
Thank you very much. And table 9?
Yeah, and it's aligned with that suggestion. It was that a proportionate percentage of profits earned through Quilcha's commercial activities.
So is a significant proportion okay? As a significant proportion of profit?
Yeah.
Significant portion of income earned through cultures to be ring-fenced or proportion of profit. What's the emphasis, John?
Just in relation to the income, there's a cost. Sorry, in relation to the income, there's a cost associated with that for the entity. So how do you profit is something that you can quantify.
Okay, so with that in mind, does it make more sense just to focus on profit? Is that okay, 11? Yeah, okay. So with that in mind, all in favour of including a significant portion of profit in the wording for FWH6, please raise your hand. Thank you, that's carried. Great. FWH7? Yeah, table 9 and table 11 again.
Hi, just a change in wording to the state must plan for appropriate felling management, including provision for continuous cover to encourage more diverse and sustainable mixed forestry management model.
Okay, thanks. We might get that wording up to Cahill, please. Thank you. And table 11?
Yeah, just after the clear felon to say in the short to medium term, just so that there's some timeline and when it's going to be done.
Thanks, Joe. So we might include that on the wording that we will discuss now in a second. The foresters in the room, does this make sense? Kenneth from table 9?
Probably the theory behind our suggestion is that if we get rid of clear felon, we're taking out the commercial impact of forestry, and people will not plant forestry.
Right. Okay, thank you for that background to that, Kenneth. So, sorry, James, yeah.
Yeah, most commercial forestry in Europe isn't clear felling. It's continuous cover. We're the outlier in Europe in terms of the continuation of the clear. So we shouldn't basically associate clear felling with just the only means of commercial forestry.
Is the wording proposed in red suitable then for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, grand. Thank you, James. Okay, so the state must plan for appropriate felling management. Now, I'll go back to table 11. Now, is there a necessity to include the short to medium term in this? I'm not sure if we go with option 2. No. Well, okay. So let's vote on all those in favour of the new wording underneath. Please raise your hand. That's carried. Thank you. Can I just get an opinion on whether the timing needs to be included now that we have reworded it? I personally don't think so. No, that's fine. Joe's shaking his head. Great. Thank you, Joe. Okay, FWH 8. Okay, FWH 9, 4, 2, 6, and 9.
Thanks. We'd just like to add a metrics instead of, say, drastically reduced, and in line with an earlier the pesticides one, we'd say is to be reduced by at least 50% to be consistent.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. 2.
Our change was the use of pesticides in public and private forestry is to be drastically reduced with the intention of completely phasing out its use.
Okay, thanks, Rory. Hold on a second. Use of pesticides in public and private forestry. Okay, I'll let Cahill catch up with that. Table 6 and then table 9.
Just a reword on that one as well. We thought the word drastically was a bit too dramatic and not very policy-like, so we would like to propose that it be changed to the use of pesticides in forestry to be reduced and carefully managed. I think putting an arbitrary figure of 50% on it, it's just picking a number unless that number is derived from some sort of research. I don't know. Is it appropriate to do that?
It is coming from recommendation 18 on document A, page 2, in line with the EU policy.
Okay, that's fair enough, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, if it's coming from somewhere, it's not just a figure we've picked. If it's coming from something, that's
so let's have a chat about this then. And then Edward in table 9.
I just wanted to see if there is a really big difference between this point and the point 18 in the A document, or if there is an overlap, and if there is, then we can probably get rid of this one.
Good point. It's very valid. Do we need this at all, actually, because it's covered? Mihal?
In a previous life, I was a fisheries board manager, and we had an ongoing challenge in the southeast of Ireland with trying to persuade our brethren in Cuillte to reduce and phase out the aerial spraying of fertiliser and pesticides and so on. And so the use of pesticides is a significant ongoing issue, and it's a little different. It's good to call it out in this section, And our colleague is right that there is kind of an overlap with the earlier one, but the earlier recommendation is more broad, and actually it reads as if it's more aimed at domestic use, you know, households and so on. So I think there is merit including this. And the amendments that have been made are strengthening it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Micheál. With that, Edward, if you don't mind, I'll make an executive call on it, because I do think that when people come to read the report, they might just go to their own section and not actually read the whole thing. And if if it's particularly a difficult problem in forestry, I think there's merit in keeping it additionally here, taking your point as well made. So with this, reduced and carefully managed, Table 6, are you happy if we go with the 50%? Is that okay? Okay. So, well, we could do the use of pesticides in forestry to be reduced by at least 50%. And I think it wouldn't make sense to, I mean, public and private forestry. Okay. So let's vote on those separately. To include at least 50% instead of drastically. All in favour of that change specifically, please raise your hand. Thank you. So use of pesticides reduced, okay. And the specification of public and private forestry to be included in that recommendation, please raise your hand if you agree with that. Okay. With the intention to completely phase out its use, is that still relevant to include here? Okay, so all those in favour of including this last phrase in the sentence, please raise your hand. And all those against including it, please raise your hand. Okay, that's not going to get included then. Okay, it's still great. Thank you, everybody. So we move on then to FWH 10. Table 5. Louise?
At the end part of the line there, where it starts that hedge cutting contractors, we suggest changing contractors to all hedge cutting personnel, because it's not just contractors that cut hedgerows. And we also suggest at the end of the line to add in sanctions must be in place for all hedge cutters who break regulations. Thank you.
Now, I'm just going to ask Louise, if all hedge cutting personnel complete such courses, what happens if you're a farmer who's got hedges? Yeah, but if it's anyone cutting hedges, it's still farmers. That's, okay, so Keith had his hand up, and then Kenneth, and then Jean.
Yeah, we just suggested one addition to the original line, which is at the end that hedge cutting contractors complete such courses and be licensed.
Yeah, thank you. And Kenneth and then Jean. So, oh, sorry, in table 10 as well, Johnny. So 9, 10 and 1. Or 9, 1 and 10.
Just the last one, sanction, was he placed or not? If they're being employed by the landowner or whoever, does that get the landowner out of the question? Under the current legislation, it's the landowner who is responsible. They're only being hired in.
Thanks, Kenneth. Yeah, I think the wording on this might lead us into trouble. So we'll just have a chat about it in a minute. Jean?
Just on hedge cutters, like gardeners cut hedges.
That's where I think we are. Just the language, we might be in trouble with it. Johnny?
Could we say hedge cutters, contractors and their employees?
But they are the contractors, are they, Johnny?
Not necessarily.
No? Okay. Hedge cutting contractors and employees. Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Johnny. Well, contractors. Okay. Let's take these in different ways. Keith?
Yeah, you can add, just in answer to Jean's thing, you could add, on the top line, you could have hedge cutting flail mower contractors, which is specific kind of hedge cutting.
And then if I didn't use a flail mower, but if I used my chainsaw. I think we're going to get ourselves into bother with this. So, Micheál?
Just to comment on the last sentence that was suggested about sanctions must be in place for hedge cutters who break regulations. I don't think that's necessary as a recommendation. I was just checking with Conor. There are existing sanctions and penalties under the Wildlife Act for people who break regulations.
Yes.
So I don't think there's any point in putting a recommendation if it's already there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay because it's already in legislation? Okay. Thank you. Table 5. Okay. So it's to discuss the language. And just with those points made, I think if we change it to personnel, it's not. It'll just cause more hassle than anything else. So with that in mind, I think we have to keep it as contractors, but we can include and their employees, and we can include and be licensed. Okay, so they're the two things I suggest we vote on. Hilary?
Just would the intention be commercial contractors or not? Would that people are making money out of it, or I don't know. But then, of course, farmers again.
Yeah, so I think if you're a contractor, I think that says enough. Liam, table 10.
I think flail mowers probably do a lot of damage, but I think by putting in that it's just on flail mowers.
We're not voting on that.
Okay.
No. Okay, so all hedge cutting contractors and their employees. So all those in favour of including and their employees, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And so, yeah. And all those in favour of including and be licensed, please raise your hand. That's a majority of the room. And it's just that we're recommending courses and certification. So that it's not to do with landowners being punished. Nessa and Kenneth? Can we wait till we get to the microphone to you, Nessa? Yeah.
Hedge management courses and certification should be reintroduced. So they were there before and gone?
Apparently so.
Okay, thanks.
Kenneth?
Follow on from Jean's point, and farmers who have their own hedge cutting equipment doesn't seem to be covered in that.
No, but we've included courses on the green cert for farmers. So one would hope that within the biodiversity, then that would be some certification. I think if we start listing people here, we'll get into the weeds.
Oh, no, all hedge cutting, all people involved in cutting hedges.
But as Jean said, you could be in your garden. Do you know? I think we're safe with this.
Okay.
Okay, and we voted on it now. Okay, thank you, everybody. Great, and FWH 11 is gone, and we have gone back to AB1, and we've highlighted that. Amazing. Okay, well done, everybody. Yes, hold on 1 second. No, I already said that. We're going to vote on that individually. Yeah. Okay, so you now have a document. No, they have it on their page. No, I think they do. Do you have a one-page document with grey writing? No. Sorry, table 1. Okay, sorry, Jenny, can we get the mic to Jenny, please?
Hi, I just want to check that we made the changes, or what changes were made to FWH2.
So that was the wording from table 4, Jenny?
And ourselves, we were looking for it to be strategic asset. Where is it? It's above that. Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You're right.
Yeah, there.
Sorry,
You said
you're right.
The state should not seek to. The state should maintain and control national ownership of woodlands in Ireland as a national asset.
And public good. I'm sorry,
Public
it
good,
wasn't
yeah.
on my sheet. Thank you, Jenny,
No
for
worries.
reminding us. Okay, we didn't. would do this. Sorry. The state should maintain and control national ownership of woodlands in Ireland as a national asset. Now, I do not know enough to comment on this from the legal and from the forestry perspective, so I'm going to look to the back of the room for a comment. Thank you so much, Mary.
Sorry, I have terrible eyesight, so I have to keep taking photos and then zooming in in order to be able to read what's actually on the screen. So I think we were looking at this and saying that firstly, it might indicate that this applies to all woods. And I know I was talking to the table earlier, but James and I were having a discussion about potentially tweaking the language slightly. So perhaps for the start of it, that the state should seek to maintain ownership and control of state-owned woodlands. And then if you want to have your strategic bit, I can't see it anymore, but something along those lines.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
we were specifically worried about the recent media about Quilcha selling off the lands, the 123,000 acres to a UK pension fund. So yeah, we did take yes, we want to take away the word seek. Okay, Jean.
Okay, so let's just have a think about this now. Sorry, Mary, you go on.
No, so it was just, should maintain ownership and control of state-owned woodlands. So James, so our point was that we were looking at going, it should be state-owned woodlands that it refers to, rather than woodlands generally, and also ownership and control rather than others.
And then we don't have to include in Ireland, because that's what the state owns, and we don't need to describe it as a national asset, do we? It's up for debate. Okay.
We had the word strategic future biodiversity asset or something, but like for the future of Ireland, if we lose control of it.
As a strategic national asset?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, James?
Yeah, that won't prevent what's going on at the moment, because they're buying new land, and Quilcha is facilitating the buying of new land by a commercial entity. So that maintains the current ownership and prevents you from selling off current state assets, but it doesn't prevent a state-owned company facilitating another commercial entity buying new state land. It wouldn't come under that, would it?
And this is the problem. Yeah. So it's a new
It's a case of
entity.
what you want to do, you know. This will secure the current state-owned land, which is good, but it doesn't prevent that new, the state facilitating.
So can you say that to me again, James? How did you describe it? Is it a state-owned company?
Yeah, so currently Quilcha are going into partnership with a commercial investment investor.
Yeah. I'm just focusing on the wording. So if we said something like then, and would this cover Table 1? The state should maintain ownership and control of state-owned woodland and state-owned companies' woodlands as strategic national assets. Does that then
No, because Quilcha don't plan to own this land.
No,
Yeah.
but if it's a state-owned company, that's my word. How would you describe the entity that is buying this new forestry?
It's going to be owned by a foreign investor, but it's going to be managed for that foreign investor by a state-owned company.
By a state-owned...
So the state, Quilcha won't own this land at all.
If there's a way of describing what that is, that's the language we need to put in here for the purposes of Table 1.
No, I'm not too sure. I'm just saying that this won't do it. I'm not saying that we need to do this.
Okay, it's good to hear. So you're saying that that's a new thing. They're going to buy land. They're acting as an agency, but that the existing Quilcha land is protected.
As far as I'm aware at the moment, there's no plans to sell any existing Quilcha land to this company. But what's going to happen is Quilcha is going to source new land for this contract. They're going to manage that land, and the new entity is going to own the land and draw down the forest premium.
I mean, if it's not Quilcha, it could be somebody else. So that's not a big problem with that. That's not state-owned land, so we don't care. Sorry, I don't care. It's the existing stuff.
So does Quilcha own the company? No.
No.
Quilcha
They're just managing it.
They are planning on selling off a certain amount to that UK pension fund. And in the future, what they're saying, what some of the rural NGOs are saying is that what they're going to do, the majority of that land, again, will be put back into the Sika spruce trees. The majority will be back into type of woodland. We'll have no control in making sure that the new woodlands will be the Irish broadleaf for it. So we'll have, all that control is gone again. So into the future, in 30 years' time, we'll be saying, well, look at the crop we planted again. So we're seeing this, and it's still under, I don't know, I think it's only a couple of days ago where they've said that they are not liable to say whether that who's going to win, is it going to be that pension fund or not, but it's all, a lot of the TDs are already asking for more information, and which has gone ahead with a process like this without even waiting for this report to come out or apply any of the other acts that are.
So what I'm going to suggest then, Jenny, is actually if WH2 and WH1 are enacted by Coillte and they manage that woodland, then that shouldn't be all the monoculture. So if the first two recommendations in this sector are implemented, it should hopefully cover some of that new entity and the worries.
Well, I think at this table we're talking about if it's recognised as a strategic biodiversity asset, then the state needs to recognise that. So the fact that we're saying that they need to change their corporate values, not to be, when they were up here they said, look, our mandate is to make money for the state. Well, we're saying, look, that's not your mandate anymore in those other parts. But the other important part is you have to recognise that our forests and our boglands are a strategic asset. So you're talking about the Our House Agreement and given nature legal rights. We're talking about these forests are a strategic future asset, and I don't know how, I'm not from a legal background, but we need to make sure that's enforced in some respect.
So I think with FWH1, FWH2 and this new recommendation, I feel that that is as much as we can probably recommend, but I think that probably governs it as well as we can do as an assembly. So with that wording that's here right now, is that suitable as your suggestion, table 1? Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, Mary. And then we'll go to, table 2.
So, having done a very quick Google, some of the land they are purchasing has woodland on it, but it's not state-owned woodland. So one question, and I don't have a sort of swinging in any direction in relation to this, I'm just flagging it. One option would be that to remove the phrase state-owned woodland and just say of woodland in the country, or to say state-owned woodland and other significant swathes of woodland or something along those lines. It is just an option.
We can't, I don't think we can say because it's private. So then table 2.
Just a very small thing. Would it be possible, given what Coillte are doing at the minute, that we could move this up the list as the first point?
It's high level. I actually might suggest it's a good suggestion. I actually would suggest that FWH2 is probably the most impactful because you're saying it's the goals, operations of Coillte and the Forestry Act. I think once you do that, everything else can fall into place after it. So I would suggest that FWH2 become the first one, and then FWH1, because that's talking about forestation long term, and then this one. That would be the order I would see in it. Robert?
If we just go back to the one that we've, shouting, the one we just added, if we just add on to it, where are we going? The new one, yeah. So the state should maintain ownership and control of state-owned woodlands and state-managed woodlands as a strategic national asset.
Great suggestion, thank you, Robert. So state-owned and managed woodlands. You could just say state-owned and managed, yeah. Okay, Fiona?
I just don't think we can say you should maintain ownership of your managed woodlands if you don't own them. So I agree with the principle, but we might need to break it up into 2 sentences.
As Tim just said here, if you're just managing it, you can't control it. As I said, I'm sorry. Okay, may we go back on this? Sorry. Just go back to what we had a minute ago, where we didn't have managed in it, because actually, I forgot myself. If we do FWH 1 and 2, the management's covered, because that's what we're going to say Coillte does anyway. So thank you, Fiona, for pointing that out. And thank you, Robert, for the initial suggestion. And we had a question from Sheila. It was this. Okay, so now, with this, the state should maintain ownership and control of state-owned woodlands as a strategic national asset. Dan?
Just one point on that about maintaining ownership. Does that mean they can never sell a piece of land? Because at the moment, if you want to build a house in a rural area, a lot of people will buy an acre or two off Quilcha. Now, Quilcha are required to replace that by buying land somewhere else. They have to keep a net figure of acres held or whatever, but they can sell 2 acres, but they have to buy it somewhere else. So if we say that the state should maintain ownership of all state-owned woodland, are we stopping them doing that? We might run into an issue there.
Thanks, Dan.
Sorry about that. We'll be here tomorrow, folks.
Okay, how about then? Can I just see that afforestation, state legislation, okay, forestry, include, okay. How about state woodlands must be governed as a strategic national asset. Governed is the wrong, but state woodlands should be seen and managed as a strategic national asset. Recognised and managed. But with the other two preceding, we're getting the message in. As a long-term, as a strategic long-term national asset, because then that kind of, you're hedging, don't sell it if it's long-term. Okay, how about that? This is a tricky one. Micheál, oh no, we're going to miss. We're going to miss dinner.
I think we're nearly there, but my suggestion would be even that phrase that you just used would be added in under the one on the fundamental review of policy. In other words, that you would say, as part of this policy review, the state should ensure that. Because then it quite clearly links in this aspiration to a revision of the Act. So as part of this review, and then the rest of the phrase that's there, I think it achieves what the citizens are looking for here, but it also makes sure it's not left on its own. Because there's a policy review in one place, which is a very clear legal thing that the Dáil can take some interest in, but you have to tie in this aspiration about national ownership into it. As part of this review, should be recognised, managed, yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Micheál. Jean?
We shouldn't have to, I mean, they don't have to do the reviews, so why, I mean, could we not keep the thing as clear ownership? I mean, this review, they don't have to, the review can be put down the line, so what do they do in the meantime? So just say what we want to say, and then put what Tom said as a caveat. There may be smaller whatevers, but that fundamentally the most of it should remain in state-owned, bar some small pieces.
Sorry, Jean. Can you phrase that?
Keep the ownership simple. The original addition that it should stay in state ownership, and any other thing put in as a caveat. The review, if you imply that this happens after a review, that it implies that it doesn't exist now.
I get you, but I think if we put in the ownership, it just lands us into trouble straight away because we're saying they can't sell anything, what Dan said.
Put that in as a set, put the big important thing up first, and put the small piece as a caveat, that they're allowed to sell small pieces. So you have the big trust of it as a big point, and then, yes, but they are allowed to sell small pieces for local needs.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. Can you write it down for me and give it to Cathal so he can put it up on the screen? Sorry, Jean. Thank you. Tim, you can make a suggestion. Can you do it into the microphone? Thank you.
So, would we move the sentence, or the part of the sentence, state woodlands should be recognised and managed as a strategic long-term national asset, to the end of the first sentence in that FWH2? There is a conflict of interest between business aims and corporate responsibility, particularly for state agencies. State woodlands should be recognised as and managed as a strategic long-term.
It doesn't fit there.
Do you not think so?
No.
Maybe just to deal with Daniel's point about being able to sell off little small pieces for the benefit of communities to keep them in, etc. I mean, you could add to that sentence, should be managed as a strategic long-term national asset and for the benefit of the public good, or just build in some allowances to be able to deal with things that does benefit communities.
So I'm actually thinking now it's still separate recommendation. So we'll go back on Micheál's suggestion and we'll take this actually as a separate. Sorry, Cathal. Thank you. And Hilary?
Yeah, just when I'm reading the first sentence there's a conflict of interest between business aims and corporate responsibility, particularly for state agencies. Are we specifically referring to forestry agencies here? Or are we referring to...
Well, I mean, we could be referring to a lot, but it's within the forestry section. So if you're reading this, you're in forestry section.
Okay, and the ownership issue, I don't know if there's a distinction between owning the land and owning the trees, because some farmers will have the land, but the forestry own the trees, so the ownership gets messy in that regard.
And that's why we're focusing on state here specifically. Jean, does this satisfy your suggestion if it's out again as a separate recommendation? Keith?
Yeah, I think I'd go with Jean on this in terms of go back to the words ownership, and for the benefit of the good, then in terms of when they're applying it, they can work out the little details.
Can you just say that into...
I think if we keep the recommendation as high level as we can, and then in the text of the report, then give examples like Dan has just mentioned, and we could talk about communities benefiting by people staying in their local communities, etc., etc. It doesn't. The detailed text doesn't have to be in the recommendations. Let's just keep it as high level as we can.
With that in mind, I'm going to suggest we go with the new recommendation, but talk around it in the report as to ownership, because I think if we start talking about ownership here, there's too many caveats that we can get lost in. So Fiona and, sorry, on table 11, I'm sorry.
Thanks. I agree with not including caveats. I think it gets tricky, but perhaps the state must retain its percentage or proportion of ownership of the state of its lands, so that if there's a bit sold off, as Dan said, it has to be purchased elsewhere, or retain its proportion of ownership of state lands on behalf of the Irish people.
I'm going to make an executive call. We're not going to get into ownership and proportions because it's just too tricky. So I'm going to suggest we vote on the new one. That's what I'm going to suggest, Fiona.
Can I add one more small point? I think there was a lot of furore over the Coillte decision and probably a bit of disinformation about whether it actually meant state lands would be sold off. I think there's still an open question, and we're in a climate of a lot of investment funds coming into Ireland and buying up strategic Irish assets, which is outside of our terms of reference. But in this context, Coilte's power is to manage the forests, state forests, on behalf of the Irish people. And I would like us to send a strong message that they should continue to manage those forests as our property, not as property.
Which I think the new recommendation says.
Okay.
Okay. Brendan? On table 8, behind you.
I think the key problem here is ownership, state ownership and private ownership. I think that can be avoided if we say that all large-scale commercial forests must be managed in line with national biodiversity strategic objectives. So in other words, whether the state owns it or someone privately, must comply with best practice biodiversity measures, whatever they may be. So that's what we're concerned about here, that the forests are managed properly, that the native species are introduced, etc., no matter who owns them. And I think that can be reflected and avoid the ownership issue.
But what are the best practices, Brendan?
We've a lot of recommendations there already about that, so You know, so whatever the state policy is in relation to management of forests for...
And I think that they all need to be reviewed, so I don't think we're going to refer
Oh, yes,
to...
they can be reviewed, but I'm saying that, you know...
Do you have a specific wording?
Yes, that all commercial forestry must
do,
be managed in line with state biodiversity policy.
Okay. All large-scale forestry must be managed in line with state biodiversity policy. What's large scale? And what's the state biodiversity policy? I don't think there is a state biodiversity policy, you see. That's a problem there. But that's not policy, they're just recommendations. Yeah. Sorry, get the microphone to Brendan.
My basic point is we're getting caught up about ownership, which is an intractable problem and beyond our terms of reference, and we can't solve it. But from a citizens' assembly on biodiversity, we should just make a statement that all forestry should be managed, whatever, I'm not a forestry person, should be managed in terms of best practice. That's as simple as that.
I take your point, Brendan, but I think... I think the new recommendation...
Can we put my suggestion to the vote then, that line that I put in?
Okay. So Stephen, Liam and Hilary. I'm only going to take wordings at this point. And sorry, back to table 11 as well. Sarah, sorry. Okay. So can you get Kate, can you give that to Sarah, and then Stephen, table 3?
It's just an idea, it might cover off Brendan's point as well. If we just kept a general sentence at the beginning to say woodlands should be recognised as a strategic long-term national asset and providing public good, and then follow on with specific state-owned woodlands, and so just leave kind of a general comment at the beginning for the principle of it.
Can you go down a little bit there? Just woodlands. That's so sensible. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, and Stephen?
Could I just suggest something on the lines of public-private partnership, because that seemed to have worked in other areas and it might simplify things. It's just a thought that came to me there.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm not sure where it would fit into this specifically. Liam?
Oh, it's great to get up again.
Sorry.
Thank you. You guys are better than I am. You've had more practice. As you arrive at what's going to be your executive decision on the wording, I think, might it be useful to add 2 words at the end of it, which I think have some legal import: for the common good.
For the common good, as opposed to the public good.
Very useful phrase at times.
Thank you, Liam. Okay, Hilary?
My suggested wording is, sorry, no, you put back in state, because this is about the state at the end of the day, not about the private, but my suggested wording is we vote on new, and we are getting absorbed here in something, and I'm not sure what problem we're trying to solve with all these conversations, but there's a bigger issue here with Cuilta that we can't solve in this room. All we can do is make recommendations based on biodiversity, and I think we're getting a bit bogged down, and we could be here till tomorrow on this conversation.
Okay, so we're going to go to a vote now on new, and we're going to vote on it as to whether it should be woodlands or whether it should be state-owned woodlands, whatever the room prefers. You will then get to vote on it when it goes to a ballot. The ownership issue is too much for us to deal with because we don't know how to word it in a way that will actually make sense. Keith, yes, is it relevant to the new?
Just a suggestion, last one. Woodlands currently owned by the state should be retained and managed by the state.
No, because we're back into that problem about somebody wanting to build a house. No, it's too messy. We have to maintain oversight over all of this. So if the state has asked us to come back with proposals to help it deal with biodiversity loss, the woodlands are a massive part of that. So do we talk about the state-owned woodlands or woodlands in general? So just focusing on new there, Cathal, if you can just focus on new. If we can just see that only. Thank you. So all those in favour of including state-owned woodlands as opposed to just woodlands, please raise your hand. That's a majority. And all those who just want to focus on woodlands, please raise your hand. Okay, so it's state-owned woodlands, and that's what's going to be in. And we did the thing that we said we weren't going to do, but there, it's a new recommendation. But it was worth discussing because a lot of people were concerned about it, considering development since our last meeting, so it was relevant to do. Okay, thank you, everyone, for all those contributions and all those ideas. Well done. I'm making an executive decision on the other two because we don't know enough, Brendan, and we don't know enough, Jean, about the ownership, okay, to get into it. So that's where we're going with it now. Now, to move swiftly on to another nice piece of work, we have one page in front of you, which are, it's called draft, and it's A, B, C, D, E. Now, these are 5 proposed recommendations that came in over the Christmas and New Year. They were submitted and we sent a response to the member to say that they weren't within our terms of reference. And I do not think that they are within our terms of reference. But the person who proposed them had a strong view about it. And so with that, I agreed to put them to the Assembly for discussion. However, I do believe that they're outside the terms of reference, and I don't think we necessarily should include them, because I think anything that goes beyond our boundaries affects the integrity of the rest of the set of recommendations. And that is my feeling on it, and I'm saying that as chair. So, with that in mind, and I understand where they're coming from, and there may be merit to them, but not within the terms of reference of our Citizens' Assembly on biodiversity loss, as it has been referenced by many members already. So, with that in mind, I want to take a vote on whether you want them to be included in the ballot or not. So, trial a pilot scheme of futures advisory councils in selected local authorities, drawn from multidisciplinary backgrounds in the community. These councils are there as the conscience of the people, thinking only about the potential future impacts of any proposed new development in the area. Whether or not the local authorities decide to incorporate the advice of these members is entirely down to the executive and elected officials of that local authority. And obviously that came from our first talk by Roman Kozurniak in September. So would the member who proposed it like to speak to it?
I'm going to, if I can, cover off 2 elements in that. Apologies again for talking. But I think in terms of when we go back, we knew from the very beginning that this wasn't going to be a straight line answer. It was going to be complex. It was going to be a tapestry. And one can only assume that anybody who came to talk to us was invited on the basis that they were relevant to our terms of reference. So, I mean, in that we had Roman Krasnarek and Kate Rayworth, both of who were very fresh thinkers. I mean, in terms of we've identified over time that there was a lot of common themes coming up in terms of the problems that we were facing. In terms of implementation of existing legislation, we'd be doing well. If there was properly resourced funding in existing bodies, we'd be doing well. And if there's political will to focus on the priorities, we'd be doing well. So we identified those as common blocks. So there are common blocks in terms of, you know, things that are stopping the progress from actually happening, right? So the lack of long-term thinking and the lack of commitment and constraint by electoral cycles seems to be a block to some of the issues that we are being asked to look at. Now, in terms of I would argue strongly that you're saying that it's not within the terms of reference for 2 proposals. The first one being that the state should appoint an Irish Commission and Commissioner for Future Generations, and the second one being that the state should trial pilot schemes of future advisory councils at local level. I don't agree that they're outside terms of reference, right? And I'll tell you why. I mean, in terms of the the terms of reference, the first thing is inter alia. If the terms of reference had stated inter alia biodiversity, it would mean that we are to consider all ecosystems, but it doesn't. It just states inter alia, which means, among other things, not constrained or limited to suggestions. So
I'm going to stop you there, Keith, because the terms of reference are specific here to...
Can I finish?
You can, but if you can make it brief.
Yeah. Okay, so we know what the main drivers to biodiversity loss and impacts are. We've been asked to look at opportunities to develop greater policy coherence and strategic synergies, and we've been asked to opportunities to improve the state's response to the challenge. I think that the lack of long-term thinking, the lack of inter-authority synergy, the lack of policy implementation, and the lack of body charged with long-term thinking is one of those problems. So one of the main pillars is that of the Assembly is that it's up to the members to decide. So I'm proposing that we look at an Irish Commission and Commissioner for Future Generations, which is in practice in Wales and working exceptionally well, because it's their responsibility to take all bodies who are involved in any planning for the future to make sure that all those bodies talk to each other and that they all engage with each other. And likewise, like in terms of the well-being goals that we can set, this is very new thinking in terms of trying to make sure that we look after the future generations, we look after our environment for the future, and that we put a process in place so future generations are protected, and we start to introduce a whole new way of thinking in terms of, like, you know, making sure that all these authorities work together for the best good.
Okay, thank you, Keith, for that. Okay, then, so you've dealt with A and B, thank you. The government and state ensure, if we look at C, in law, that any power generated offshore be available to meet the needs of the country first, and that the state have a stake in it on behalf of the people of Ireland. Does the person who suggested that want to speak to that?
In coming years, Ireland will be attracting a lot of foreign investment in wind power. Now, you might say that what's down here have nothing to do with biodiversity, but my argument is if we're using wind power, we have a cleaner environment, we have less emissions, so that's helpful to biodiversity. And what I'm afraid of is that we'll be using fossil fuels to power ourselves here, but our wind power that's generated offshore by some vulture funds or some crowd that lease the plot and generate the power, that power will be going to some other country and we will be bypassed. So that was my take on it. I stood over it because clean energy is helping biodiversity, whereas if we're burning gas or fossil fuel, we're not. So the point is that if the wind off this shore is producing electricity, we should have access to it, we should have a right to it, and I'm bringing it up because in 5 or 10 years' time, I can say, right, when the lights go out in Ireland, I can say, well, and some crowd have the power going to Norway, Spain, or France, or some other way, I can say, well, I stood up and I spoke for it. So that's my take on it.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'm not sure that if other countries were to do that to us right now, we'd be in a very good position. So that's just one take on it. But I do also think that EU law won't allow us to do that, but I'll refer to experts in that area. D, if the Assembly were to agree to a referendum, the state should devise and initiate a mechanism that would allow the younger citizens under legal voting age voices and opinions be heard through a separate opinions ballot box on referendum polling day. Is that... It is...
and again, it's within the terms of reference in terms of if we look at looking to promote sort of greater knowledge of it. There's no better way to inform people than to have your children start to talk about it and become a topic of conversation. This could be one of those ones. I know it's complex, I know it's difficult to do, but it could be one of those ones that actually kickstarts conversations in homes and in schools and is a statement of intent that we're looking after the future.
Again, it might be relevant in other contexts to trial, but I think our recommendation 20 in document A incorporates the younger generation. But I take that that's your, thank you.
Yeah, and we made a commitment to the younger people that were here that we would make sure their voices were heard.
We did. Okay, and E, the Citizens' Assembly have devoted their time on the request of the Department of Taoiseach to addressing the issues of biodiversity loss and have come up with recommendations. As implementation issues and accountability are key concerns raised during this process, we look for the Taoiseach to lead by example and reconvene the Citizens' Assembly in 6 months' time to personally present to the members of the Assembly the response to the recommendations as agreed in the Houses of Oireachtas. Would the member who suggested this like to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. That was me. I'm not sure if I have the energy at this stage of the evening for this, but my intention here really is, and I mean, to be clear, I'm not asking the Taoiseach to report to the Citizens' Assembly because that's not how this works, and I totally understand that. It's more that throughout everything and every sector and everything we've looked at here, the same thing keeps coming back: accountability, responsibility, you know, a lack of implementation of all these plans that are published, and that's consistent throughout everything we've discussed over the past number of weeks. And it's more, I'm out looking for a symbolic gesture from the Taoiseach to say, I said 6-12 months time, the timeline I'm not caught up on, that's up to the Oireachtas work, but to come back in a symbolic way and say to us, look, as a Citizens' Assembly and as a process, I stand in front of you today. I say, the Oireachtas has taken on board your recommendations, this is what they're doing with it, or whatever. And it's more a symbolic thing to lead from the front and say, we need to acknowledge the work as a Citizens' Assembly and how it will be implemented and delivered. And it is just to reinforce the accountability and responsibility, because I strongly feel that if we don't do really good work in that specific regard, all of these recommendations just don't have as much weight.
Well, I would say to that, Hilary, that we have done good work. And I think
I know we have. I totally agree we've done good work. That's not, I know we've done good work, but I just want to make sure that there's momentum behind it. And if you have somebody that has to come back in 12 months and say, we've looked at it, it creates a whole other dynamic.
Okay.
And I know it's a big ask, and I know everybody in the government will be going, that ain't going to happen. But you know what? It can't stop us asking.
I would argue that our recommendation on having a standalone Oireachtas committee to report back on the recommendations will do that. And unfortunately, because I hate to say it, unfortunately this group won't be reconvened by the Oireachtas. This is unfortunately our last meeting. I know that's terrible, and some people would love this to go on forever, but this will be the last time that we're convened. However, if somebody would like to collect all of the details and have a reunion party, you know, maybe I won't look at the steering group, but you know, it's something that, but this will be our last time together as a cohort like this. So, now, just to reiterate, I do think that all the recommendations that we have now, we can stand over. I do think they're of a high standard. They are detailed, they are reflective, they are well informed, they represent the majority of the room, and they are representative of the people of Ireland, because that is what we are here for, to represent this room should be representative of the country as a whole. And I think we can stand over what we have done so far. Now, I'm putting this to you, and I don't want this to be, this isn't personal, but we'll put it now as votes, whether you want to include A, B, C, D, or E in your ballot. And if you vote yes to that, it will go into the ballot for document B, and you will vote on that during the week, and the outcome will be what it will be. But I wanted to put that with you, having done, having made the deliberations and decisions on it, but now providing that to the room because it was requested specifically. So with that, all those in favour of including A in our ballot paper, please raise your hand. And all those against? Okay. All those, so it's not included. All those in favour of including B on the ballot, please raise your hand. And all those against? Okay, it's not included. All those in favour of including C on the ballot, please raise your hand. And all those against, please raise your hand. Okay, it's not included. All those in favour of recommendation D, please raise your, of including recommendation D in your ballot, please raise your hand. Okay, and all those against including D, please raise your hand. Okay, that's not included. All those in favour of including E on the ballot, please raise your hand. And all those in favour of not including E, please raise your hand. Okay, they are not included, but that does not negate the really important contributions that people have made previously and all of the work that we have done as a collective to put together this very comprehensive set of recommendations dealing with this very complex issue in the breadth and the depth that you have done all of this work on. So I still think with this, we are presenting something really coherent to the Oireachtas, and we'll have a report like this in a few weeks' time that we'll have to stand over and present to the Oireachtas. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for your contributions and for the proposals. Thank you for everyone for considering everything so carefully. Thank you for working so well, so collegially today, specifically as well. We're a little bit over time, but not hugely. And with that, let's take a break, and we're going to ask you to do your feedback surveys, and then we can have a little bit of a chill and have a last word, voices of the Assembly, and just share some thoughts going forward, or share your experiences. And not to jump on your parade, Nessa, but stories like your story this morning, where yourself and Nicole went for a swim, and other swimmers met you and said, thank you for giving up your time to do this work on behalf of us in the Assembly. Like, that is just spectacular. So we'll just share our reflections in a couple of minutes after we do our evaluation forms. So thank you, everybody. Please give a warm round of applause to yourselves.